Hi, everybody. My name is Kofi Kankam. I'm one of the co-founders of Admit Advantage. We're really pleased to be working with Beat the GMAT today to go over crafting the perfect MBA essay. Now, that's a little bit of a misnomer in that there's so many different kinds of MBA essays that you obviously have to work on, and um, every school requires more than one essay for the most part. But generally, there are a couple of different types of essays and a couple of different ideas that you want to conceptualize and sort of execute on in terms of addressing specific essay questions. So we're really pleased to be working with Beat the GMAT. Jennifer Mims, who's a success specialist, is awesome and fantastic. We've been lucky to be a partner of theirs for about 3.5 to 4 years at this point, so we're super excited. Let's deep dive. Now, a couple quick things. One, all of you have been muted, but if you have specific questions, you can type them in. I'll definitely leave time for questions at the back end of the presentation. So if something's really pressing, feel free to type it. But if you can just hold your questions until the end, that would be fantastic. And with that, let's dive in. Okay, so a little bit on the company. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this because everything's up on the website, and that's really not the purpose of the presentation. I'm giving you a little bit on the company just so you guys feel comfortable that I know and we know what the heck we're talking about and have a pretty good feel for who we are. So we're essentially an admissions consulting company working with candidates from beginning to end, beginning being them considering going to business school, beginning to start the process. The end is once candidates have been accepted and they're hopefully making decisions about which school they want to attend. So we essentially work with them from application strategy through school enrollment. Our process is known to be exceptionally structured, quite deliberately. We feel that when candidates are applying from big companies where a lot of people tend to be applying from school, or applying from a big demographic where a lot of people tend to be applying to school, or even applying from a small company where there isn't necessarily really well-established feeding path to business school, it's really important to be thorough and deliberate about the different elements of your application that you're looking to infuse, different elements of your background that you're looking to infuse in your application. We're also known to have a really strong screen. We're very selective. We've been really fortunate in the last couple of years. The upheaval in the economy has been great for us because we're able to get really top-tier people who don't just have great credentials, but also are really good with people and really are sort of process-oriented. So, for example, we posted at Kellogg a couple of years ago, and we had about 47 people apply to be consultants within about a 4 to 5 day span. So, been very fortunate in that sense. And the last thing that marks our company is we have an exceptional amount of diversity, obviously in terms of nationalities and cultures, but more importantly in terms of different kinds of jobs. We've got people that have worked in finance, bankers, hedge fund people, people that have been marketing. We've had a government speechwriter for Joe Biden on our team, different technologists, and obviously consultants and entrepreneurs. So we've tried to have people on our team who mirror your backgrounds as well as your future interests post-business school. The three core tenets of our company are experience. So all of us are alumni from top-tier schools, and we've been on the other side of the table as alumni admissions interviewers and or second-year interviewers. We're also really client-focused. Hopefully you guys see that from our involvement on Beat the GMAT generally, but we try to become our friends with our clients. We think it's really important to create that sort of comfortable atmosphere where candidates can reveal things about them that will allow us to give them an edge in terms of applying to school. And obviously performance. I mean, that is the most important factor. Where are candidates getting into school? And we've been very fortunate to have candidates get into all these schools, and actually quite a few more, but really the top tier schools, we've been fortunate to place people there. And frankly, they've been really good candidates as well. We can't really claim all credit for that. But, you see Wharton, you see Stanford, Harvard, INSEAD, LBS, like HKUST is not here, but really globally, the top 20, 25 American schools, the top 15 European schools, and then the top 5 to 10 Asian schools tend to be our purview. Really quickly on the team, interestingly enough, all of us, the three sort of founders, we all went to Wharton. We're all class of '04. Eric worked at Accenture in DC. And he sold a software company before business school. At Wharton, he was an admissions rep. He did his undergraduate degree in engineering from Brown, and he also was fortunate enough at Wharton to be a Twigo Fellow, which was a full ride at the time. I'm Kofi. I worked at a company, in addition to Accenture, called Net2Phone, which was kind of a predecessor to Skype. Not as successful, but voice over IP company. I also sold a software company coming out of business school, served in the Wharton Venture Initiation Program. I have been an alumni intern at both Harvard and for Wharton. I did my undergrad degree in neurobiology at Harvard, stayed there and did another year, pursued a master's in education. Then at Wharton, was a Joseph Wharton Fellow, ran the biggest conference on campus, and also served as a marketing teaching assistant. Eli Kennedy has a very similar background, worked at Accenture in Los Angeles, and has sort of been in sort of the educational sort of nonprofit space a little bit before business school and certainly afterwards. He ran the Whitney Young Conference with me, and also sort of ran the business plan competition. The fourth sort of quote unquote initial manager founder is a guy named Rodney Morrison, who was a management part of MLT, Management Leaders for Tomorrow, was also a recruiter at Lehman Brothers and Barclays, and served at Wharton for about 8 years. So this is sort of the core management team. But again, our consultants are about 32, 33 people. Were all alums of, a bunch of Wharton people, Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, INSEAD, Chicago, I'm trying to think, Kellogg, NYU, Yale, et cetera. So really sort of the top 7 to 10 schools are sort of where our consultants hail from. Okay. That's all I'm going to talk about on the company. Again, if you have more questions, you can email me, or you can look at our website, admittedvantage.com, to sort of get more background. Let's deep dive into some of the essays. Okay. So the biggest issue we see with candidates coming in is candidates want to deep dive on the essay questions immediately. And I can't tell how many people, reach out to us literally every single day and say, school X released their application. I'm ready to start writing the essays. And, we don't hear them say anything about developing, specific brand, specific leadership characteristics that they want to infuse in their application, specific stories, experiences, and accomplishments that they want to infuse in your application. And you have to do that before you start writing. I know a lot of you, from speaking to you, are chomping at the bit to get into your specific essays, and you're waiting for the essays to be released. What I'm telling you today is that you should be spending time before you start writing determining what you want to say in your application. Okay, obviously the questions will change, and we'll talk a little bit about that today, but you should still have a pretty good feel for specific character traits, i.e., are you a great communicator? Are you able to make decisions, limit information? Are you analytical? Are you civically or community minded? Are you able to lead without authority? Are you adaptive? I mean, you should really think about the leadership characteristics that perhaps, respected business leaders, government leaders, political leaders, potentially, athletic leaders have. Think about those leadership characteristics, people you respect, and think about maybe some that you have as well. And you should really develop a set of, 3 to 7 of them. Now, accompanying that, either, going from the characteristics to the stories, or going from the stories to the characteristics, the direction doesn't really matter. But you should also think of the critical stories and experiences and accomplishments that kind of mark your life. So if I interviewed your best friend or a sibling or a parent or, a significant other, and I said, what are the stories that kind of mark Michael's life? They'd probably be a mixture of professional, community, personal, and perhaps academic. And you want to try to brainstorm those stories, maybe the 7 to 10 stories of your life, and then try to map that with specific characteristics that you think those stories represent. Those are the kinds of things. This process is something you can do independent of any school application. It should be done agnostic of the school. That's what you should be doing, in mid to late June, as you wait for, your intended school or schools to release their applications. It's very important you bring all of you, that you really focus on, your candidacy from a professional aspect in terms of results, strengths you demonstrate in the work environment, community. What impact have you had? Now, community can mean a lot of different things. It can be obviously where you live. It can be your work community. it can be your cultural community, it can be your religious community, but think of sort of the areas outside of work where you've had an impact, and think about maybe some stories and anecdotes which really illustrate the kind of thing, the kind of impact that you've had. And then personal. So writing about overcoming a personal challenge. For example, we had a candidate a couple years ago who was really overweight and basically lost 80 pounds in about a year. And he wrote about sort of, the process of doing that, the decision to sort of overcome his fear, go to a gym, the tenacity, the discipline, in order to sort of, hit the gym, work out every day, the time management, all these sorts of very good leadership characteristics stem from kind of what most of you would probably consider to be a non quote unquote business story. So really think about sort of your characteristics and your person as a whole, and not just look at it from an academic or professional perspective. Okay. Also think about differentiation. Okay, so you've got to be true to yourself and think about your passions. We have so many questions either on the Beat the GMAT forums or directly emailed or spoken about in these free consultations we do every day. People ask us the same question, what does school X want to hear, right? What should I write about? And I always respond, well, kind of, who are you? Like, what do you want to write about? The reality is most of you are interested in top 10, top 20 schools. And one of the reasons you're interested in those schools is because they're ranked so highly and they've got such great prestige. And one of the reasons they have those things is because they have huge diversity. So, I can tell you from my Harvard class, Harvard College or Wharton MBA, the people I sat next to were so different. So we had, in my MBA program, we had a guy, one of my good friends was a West Point alumnus. Another one was a professional athlete who literally was America's #1 ranked miler. There were a bunch of us who were entrepreneurs, that were writers, or people that came from the Peace Corps. So there isn't a correct story to basically tell. Your story needs to be told. Your passion needs to be communicated to the school. Realize that you're also competing against people that are like you. You're not necessarily competing against everyone. So I knew, for example, when I was applying to school, I had different buckets I was competing against. I was competing against people that were, that probably went to top tier schools. I was competing in a bucket of, I was competing in a bucket of fellow entrepreneurs. I was competing in a bucket of East Coast people. I was competing in a bucket of African American males. I wasn't necessarily competing against people who were not part of those demographics. There were spots that were allocated to the, that were sort of general allocations to the different groups. And those are the groups that I had to sort of, do well in and do well against. Okay. Realize that when you apply to these schools, 70% of the applicants who apply are qualified. Everyone's really good. Okay. But, only 10 to 30% get in. So if you look at a group of 20 applicants, let's say, 14 are going to be really solid in terms of GPA, GMAT, and work experience. Of those 14, like you literally could take a group of those 14, show them to the professors on campus and say, here are the 14 people that we'd want to be in your class. And the professors would have no objections to any of those people. Now, of those 14, 2 to 5 are getting in, right? Basically 10 to 25%, maybe 2 to 6 for the top 20, top 30 schools. So you have to realize that you are competing against people that are exceptionally qualified and they're all really good. And you've got to be a little bit better, okay? Make sure in terms of differentiation that you are specific. So, I just answered a question on Beat the GMAT today with a candidate who said that I think he was half Swiss and half South American, from some countries South America, and he said, I've traveled, I've done X, Y, and Z things, and I didn't say this in my response, but my response back is, in a polite way, kind of a so what. So what does that mean? How is that relevant? It's your job to sort of tell how the differences you're bringing to the candidacy, to the application process, and to the evaluation pool, how those make sense, how are those relevant. You've got to determine and decipher that for the admissions officer. So you've got to speak about specific courses and professors under whom you'd like to study, maybe based on your background. You've got to speak about the clubs and organizations that something you've done in your past will give you a leg up and or bring some value to. You've got to speak about sort of what your short and long-term goals are based on what you've done in your past. That's your job as an applicant. It's not the admissions committee member's job. That's your job. So whenever you think about sort of the differentiated aspects of your candidacy, you've got to be the one that draws the thread to make it relevant to, excuse me, the specific school to which you're applying. And the good thing about that is it also allows you to showcase your knowledge of a school, which will make it seem as if, hopefully you guys are, but it'll sort of underscore your passion for a particular program because you're speaking about specific courses, specific clubs that are in the school that your background is going to sort of map to. And that's going to be a really good thing for you and help you stand out when you apply. Okay. And then the other thing you want to do is really sell the dream. Now, some of you are not really good, and it's not your nature, which I actually respect, to beat your chest a little bit and speak and try to present yourself in the best light and speak about your accomplishments with candor and with confidence. You've got to do that. Right? This is not a place to be a muted candidate. There are way too many qualified people applying for these kinds of positions, as mentioned. So it's really incumbent upon you to paint the clear picture. What are your short and long-term goals? How does business school fit in that process? Have an aggressive long-term goal. Dream big, okay? But you've got to bridge these gaps. You've got to basically say, look, 10 years out of business, 15 years out of business school, I want to be running company X, or I want to be involved in some way, shape, or form as a marketer, or in energy, or with the specific operations. We'll think about this in terms of title, role, and function. Title, role, function, industry. Okay, so title, role / function, industry. You've got to have specifics about that. You've got to be clear about where business school fits. I don't care if you've gone to Harvard and Wharton. Business school is not going to just open that door for you. Business school, you're not going to sort of go to a school like Wharton or Harvard and come out and just be installed as a CEO, or just immediately have a funded company or run your own hedge fund. You've got to have a process. Now, that's not to say people don't do that after school. We launched our company, or a different company which is sold, but soon thereafter school. But you've got to be clear about the steps to get there. Business school should not be step one. It probably is step 2 or step 3 in your sort of 7-step process of ultimately doing whatever it is that you want to do to sort of quote unquote rule the world in your own way. Okay, so just be very clear about sort of bridging that gap, thinking of a really big picture, and then of a big sort of idea and a big thing you want to do, and then painting the clear picture, being very clear about that. Saying you want to go to business school to make more money, saying you want to go to business school to pick up specific skill sets, saying you want to go to a particular business school because it's prestigious and the president or the prime minister of your country went there. Those things are interesting, but they're not at the core of articulating why it is you really want to go to school and how it's going to help you and what you're going to bring to the process. So just be very clear about that. And again, these are all things you can do before you start writing, before any school's applications are released. And I'm suggesting to you, if you're not doing that, you're actually putting yourself at a disadvantage to the 10 to 30% that get into these schools, because that's what they're doing. I promise you, we talk to them, we work with them. These are the things that people are doing who are successful to get into these schools. So this may sound obvious, but I can't tell you people just jump into writing their applications without an outline, which is unbelievable to me. I mean, a detailed outline. Okay, that's what you need. So make sure basically you're tying the character traits and the leadership stories to the specific essay questions, and realize that when you apply, there are 4 platforms and potentially 5 that you need to be concerned about. You have your essays, you have your letters of recommendation, you sort of have the data portion of your application, you have your resume. Those are the 4 pieces that you're sort of mandatorily submitting to a school. And then for most schools, which are interview by invitation only, the interview is a piece that you get if you've done well in those 4 pieces before. And the interview becomes the 5th piece of the platform. Okay, so make sure when you're thinking about your application, make sure that you're thinking about it beyond just your essays. There are many candidates who just spend a lot of time focused on their essays, and they don't spend enough time on the other sections. For example, they don't really prep their recommenders about the specific stories, experiences, and accomplishments, or leadership characteristics they want them to put into their application. They don't really have a super tight resume that speaks about accomplishments and has, you know, numerical metrics and shows growth and responsibility. They don't look at sort of the data portion of the application, flesh out every section. We literally see candidates that sometimes just, especially when we do our DING analysis or analyses for candidates that didn't get accepted, they give us their application. I see really well written essays for the most part. And again, I may see that, but I'll look at his or her data portion, and you know, it's just very clear they spent about 40 minutes going through that, if that, and they did it the day that the application was due or the day before. Don't do that. Every piece is really important. Admittedly, your essays and letters of recommendation are more important than the others, but you can lose the game if you don't do well on any of those 5 pieces, okay? Many of you see essay questions, many schools, it's changed a little bit now, but they used to give you many, many options for essays that you want to answer. You know, answer 2 of the next 3 essays. Choose essay questions that complement your brand. A lot of times people feel like they have to answer a specific essay question. Now, admittedly, if you're given an essay question about your short and long-term goals, and that's optional, we do recommend candidates attack that question because it's so vital. But even still, you know, whether it's choosing a different option in that case or other essay questions, you've got to be careful to choose and be selective about the essay questions that fit your brand. Just a quick sports metaphor. You know, you don't see, if a guy is 6'11" or 7 foot, he's not playing point guard, right? That doesn't fit sort of his skill set and his natural disposition, and vice versa. You're not going to see a 6'3" center. Well, maybe you will in Ghana, where I'm from, but you know what I mean. You're not going to see that kind of person playing a different role. So you've got to pick the right essay questions that fit for you. Okay, make sure you answer all the questions. What I mean by that is sometimes you get an essay question that says that's 3 parts. You know, there's an A, B, and a C. We see a lot of times, especially in a tight word count, where candidates will, you know, let's say it's a 600-word question, they will get going on the first portion of it and spend 460 words on the first question, on the first portion of the question, and they'll spend basically 120 on the second portion, and then they'll spend the remaining, you know, 20 to 30 words on the last. And they won't really answer the last part of the question. You can't do that. You don't have the option. When you get a 3 or 4 part essay question and you have to answer, you've got to answer all of it. If you don't answer all of it, you're going to be seen as unresponsive. Or at the very least, you're not going to compare well to someone who has figured out how to allocate his or her word count and is answering all the portions thoroughly. So make sure you do that, okay? And realize that if you do really good outlines for your first school or two, you'll see that thematically a lot of the essay questions between schools are fairly similar. And you probably will not have to do a very detailed, if an outline at all, for your 3rd, 4th, and 5th schools, but you've got to put the time in up front, okay? And make sure before you start writing, do your research, right? So, you know, there's so much information on the website. I see a lot of times people ask questions on Beat the GMAT, which they can answer just by looking at the website. And it makes me think, I mean, it's fine to sort of use the community, crowdsource some questions in the community, but it does give me pause to think when this person, you know, enters his or her interview, when they start writing their essay questions, are they going to be willing to put the legwork in? Are they going to miss things they should have known because they're not familiar with the website? So make sure you're investing time in the website. Visit the schools. Those of you that are close to schools, there's really no excuse not to visit schools. Those of you who are overseas or in different areas, most of the time, schools, especially the top tier schools, they visit various countries. I mean, they're on the road all the time. And so if they're coming to your town, you need to be there. You need to meet admissions officers. You need to meet current students. You need to meet each other, okay? You need to begin developing a relationship, as well as alumni. You need to begin developing a relationship with those different parties, specifically the admissions committee leaders, as well as the alumni that may be able to help you and the current students. So look for those local sessions, especially now in June. You can be assured if you're in a major city, by the close of the year, most schools would have visited. And I would say even by the fall, most of these top tier schools would have visited your local city, or an adjacent city. So make sure you're attending those sessions. Speak to alumni. So most of you went to college already, or you're in college, right? It's hard to get into an MBA program without a degree, although that has happened rarely. reach out to your undergraduate alma mater, reach out to the sort of the alumni service office and say, look, I want to be connected to someone who went to Columbia. I'm thinking about applying to Columbia. I want to talk to someone who went to my undergraduate school. Let's say it's Texas that went to Columbia. They will do that. You probably can do it at this point online. So make sure you're doing that, building a rapport, getting a feel from someone who came from your background. You may have to be able to leverage that person later to write a supplemental recommendation. You may be waitlisted. You may be able to ask questions of that person that you really can't ask. You don't feel comfortable asking of anyone else, certainly an admissions officer, because it might be a quote unquote dumb question. So just make sure that you're doing that. And then be very clear about why each school is a good fit. Obviously, most of you want to go to, some combination of Harvard, Wharton, Stanford, probably Berkeley, Columbia, Chicago, Kellogg, right? I mean, I'd say 70% of our candidates want to go to at least one of those schools. Those schools are similar. It's BMW, Audi, Mercedes, Jaguar, but they are different. And you've got to be able to articulate why each school's a good fit, not just in terms of getting in, but also because hopefully you'll have some choices to make. You'll get into multiple ones. You've got to be very clear why going to school X is a good fit for you. So for example, when I applied to school, I knew I didn't want to stay in Boston anymore. I knew I wanted to sort of be close to my girlfriend, who I ended up marrying, she was in New York, I was in New York. And so I only looked at schools in the New York, Philadelphia area. And I basically, she had thought about moving to Boston, so I thought about maybe then looking at Tuck. But I thought, I don't really want to go to school in the woods. I don't want to go to a school that's small. It just wasn't a good fit for me. Awesome school. I have a lot of good friends who went to Dartmouth Tuck, but it's not a good fit for me. I want a place with a big network, really good brand name, close to a major city or in a major city. And it also was give me close proximity to, my wife, my girlfriend at the time. So those were some metrics. Now you guys are going to have different metrics, different things which are important. Those weren't all the metrics. I clearly wanted a school with good, rigorous training, great entrepreneurship program, but those were some of the important ones. Sorry, someone's catching my throat. Those were the important ones, such that I was able to make my school choices from which schools I was going to target to which schools I was going to attend once I was accepted perspective. Okay. Now, essay types. So there are different kinds of essays. You've got the story essay, right? So these essays fall in the lines of, why do I want to get a business school? Why do you want to get an MBA? Why do you want to get it from our school? Why do you want to get it now? What are your short and long-term goals? What in your background is relevant for you to pursue an MBA? What catalyzed you to pursue an MBA? There are many variations of these questions, but they're kind of all the same. They're all fit within the story essay, okay? Our tips are that you answer the questions, right? Seriously, a lot of people do not answer the question. They'll say, why business school? Why do you want an MBA? Why do you want it from our school? And they'll just answer why I want it from Stanford or why I want it from Harvard. Or they don't answer the why now portion of the application question, okay? So some essays ask for short-term, long-term goals. Others ask for the why school. You've got to be clear to provide a context. Like, so what was it that motivated you to get an MBA, or that motivated you to sort of enter the arena of applying to school? You will not have capacity in terms of word count to talk about topics outside the scope of the essays. These questions are notorious for drawing people in to start writing about things which are totally not relevant, right? So if they ask you why business school, why the particular school, they don't ask about short and long-term goals, you should answer the questions. Why do you want a MBA? Why do you want it from our particular school? And if you have capacity, you answer a little bit about short and long-term goals. But you don't spend 50% of your essay writing about your goals and then basically just touching on the core questions that are asked, okay? So make sure you're focused. Do not cut and paste from one school to another for these kinds of questions unless you're very clear that the questions are the same and the word count is the same, okay? And these are an amazing opportunity. These kinds of story essay questions are a great opportunity for you to be as specific to the school as you possibly can. This is not a place to be general. This is a place to sort of deep dive, speak about why a specific school is a good fit for you in terms of pursuing your career goals. Answer the question that's being asked. Describe yourself. So this is another essay type. How would a classmate describe you? What would you say to your class on day one? It's a classic differentiation question, right? This is not the time, if you are an investment banker, to write about everything that you do sort of in the course of like you've done in the course of the last 2 years as an analyst at Morgan Stanley. Okay. This is not a take me through your resume question. A lot of people make that mistake. This is a question where you're infusing different portions of your application. That's why we say, sort of as an added advantage, this is where you want to go back to your brand document where you listed those characteristics, you listed those critical stories, experiences, and accomplishments, and infuse them into the course of this description of yourself. Okay. If you obviously need to talk a little bit about your resume or write a little bit about your resume, write about sort of key roles and the key impact you've had. Do not detail everything you did at a particular job. Write about one specific success and the role you had in the success, and be comfortable using that as a proxy for the rest of your resume. Okay, everything else that you've done at the firm. All right. If you are someone who is sort of a little bit reticent and shy, this is where you sort of need to shed that skin, reach out, stand in the gap, and beat your chest a little bit. If you're the opposite, right? If you're someone, and you guys know who you are, if you don't know who the jerk is in the room, it's probably you, right? Don't be sort of super self-centered. Don't be super arrogant. You've got to walk a fine line. You've got to clearly tout your accomplishments, but realize that for the kind of school that you're applying, to which you're applying, there are so many talented people who've done so many amazing things that you don't want to seem like you are touting an accomplishment super aggressively that really is not as strong as somebody else's who's touting a little bit more moderately. So admittedly, this is a little bit tricky to do. These are obviously, general tips that and strategies and tactics we're trying to give you, but they work and they're true. Okay. So just be very clear that you're bringing in, personal and outside things. Be clear that you're very deliberate with your word choice, and you're speaking about your role, your impact, and you're touting your accomplishments if you're kind of a quiet, reticent type. But if you're known to sort of be the guy that, or the woman that typically sort of lets everyone know how well you're doing, then make sure that you have somebody read it and sanity check and make sure that you cares about you, and that can tell you, what, this sounds like a little bit too much. You're bragging or boasting a little bit too much. Okay. Then there's a behavioral sort of set of questions, right? This is a question about, tell me about a time when, you failed at a task, right? Classic. There's so many iterations, so many different types about this. This is how, when the school wants to see not just a description of kind of what happened, they want to see your thought process, right? This is where you basically are choose one of the three remaining essay questions. These are where they sort of put the behavioral in. They want to see how you react. This is the thinking question. Those of you who've gone into consulting as an undergraduate, a career after you did undergraduate, know that when you're doing a case question, they don't want just the answer, they being your interviewers. They want to hear your thought process. They want to hear about how you're using certain facts, pieces of information that you were given in the course of answering a specific question. This is kind of an analogous situation. So it's not about specifically the task. It's actually about how you sort of thought about the process, how you managed it, how you reacted to it, especially as a setback, lessons learned, and how you applied those lessons in future situations that you encounter that were similar to the previous one. Okay, so make sure you're recognizing that you need to sort of share your thinking here, not just breeze through saying, this happened, I looked at these facts, X happened, and then I did Y. No. You want to say, I looked at these facts, I thought a little bit about, what was going to happen. I predicted X would happen, which it did. Because X happened, I thought through my options A, B, C, D, and I pursued option C, and I brought it to a good conclusion with the X and Y. If you followed that, you're quite intelligent. But I think you get my point. You've got to be really clear about your thinking, okay? Don't be afraid to give a real example. Don't be afraid to give a real example of a failure. If they're asking for a failure, if they're asking for a weakness, don't say my biggest weakness is I'm too disciplined, I bite off more than I can chew, or I work too hard. That's not really being genuine. All of us have weaknesses, and make sure you're clear on those. Think about the lessons learned, right? So all of these mistakes, it's okay to make mistakes. It's not okay to make the same mistake twice. From an admissions committee perspective, there have to be lessons learned. You guys have heard the adage that most entrepreneurs fail once or twice before they have a success. They do that because that happens because there were lessons they needed to learn. They didn't just have the success The third time, after failing the first two times, randomly, they thought about mistakes they made, and they were able to apply those sort of lessons and safeguard against those mistakes in the future, and then they had success. So really be clear about that. Be clear about sort of articulating how a specific event or situation impacted your life. And then again, choose your essays wisely. So always go back to sort of your branding statement, those stories, experiences, and accomplishments, as well as critical leadership components, and use that as your base that you will then leverage to answer specific questions. There are leadership questions, right? So questions about sort of, the impact you had. So think about that. What kind of impact you had? What legacy existed? Every school wants to see that you did amazing things at an undergraduate level, started a club, or were involved with a club that still exists now that you're gone. Be clear in your leadership questions about what you've done beyond what was asked of you. So, don't write about sort of being a vice president of a club and just doing what a vice president typically does. That is leadership in a way, but if you're going to make your essay stand out, you really want to talk about how you filled the gap, took initiative, and addressed a problem that maybe historically hadn't been addressed, that wasn't your quote unquote responsibility, right? Think about your leadership style and be clear about how you lead. Do you lead by example? Do you lead by great communication? Do you lead sort of by, summoning the opinions of different people, then and being quiet, letting them hash out, then coming in at the back end? There are many different ways to lead. Be clear about your own leadership style and how it was effective, okay? Make sure you're leveraging your letters of recommendation to confirm these sorts of leadership stories and victories, successes, if you will, especially professionally. There's nothing better from a candidate than writing about something that happened really successfully in his or her job and getting it corroborated by, by their boss. And this is why you have to tell your boss what you want him or her to write about. It's not good enough to, or he or she to write about. It's not good enough to basically just leave that bucket, wide open and let them write about anything. You've got to sort of control and make sure everything fits together. Okay. If you work in a team, be specific about what you did. There's so many people that work in deals, in finance or consulting projects, and write about a great success of their team and what the firm accomplished, but they're not clear about what they did. This is not the time to tout your team. It's the time to tout yourself. And you've got to be comfortable. There's a way to deal with humility, but you've got to be very clear about your own contribution. Okay. Strengths, weaknesses, accomplishments, disappointments. That's another theme. Very, very prevalent. You've got to give real examples again, especially weaknesses and disappointments. Do not give the trite answer. Okay. Think about your sort of most important assets and accomplishments. This is why you need to have the brand document from the beginning, right? If you have a weakness, again, it's totally okay. If you have disappointment, it's totally okay. Write about the lessons learned and hopefully actions taken. So this thing, I didn't do well academically in college because I wasn't a great communicator. I tended to bite off more than I could chew. I got to my job. I started to falter. I was doing too much. I went to my boss and said, I need help in blank, 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 or I think we should restructure blank, 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 and allow me to get focused. And I avoided sort of the disappointment and underperforming professionally as I did in underperforming academically, right? So there were lessons learned. There were actions taken the next time the situation came about. That's a wonderful story. That's what business schools want to see. They want to see that, you can face difficult circumstances, learn, and get better, because it makes them feel like you're going to go into business school, learn, especially when you're doing a lot of cases, you're going to see protagonists who made mistakes. You're going to be able to sort of, adopt those lessons in your own life, professionally, personally, and then be successful. Okay. Make sure that whatever you're writing about sort of in these kinds of questions, strengths, weaknesses, accomplishments, disappointments, you're consistent with your brand characteristics and stories. You don't want to step sort of too far away. That's why you've got to have this strategy from the beginning. Okay. And then there's the optional essay. So it's a plug essay, right? So if you have gaps in your application, bad grades, gaps in your work experience, use the optional essay. Okay. If they're proactively address these things, don't wait. Don't think that, no one's going to see that you got blown out your sophomore year because you're trying to get into sorority or fraternity and you can just kind of get past it. You're not. You've got to write about it. This is what these admissions, committee members do. They review applications day in, day out. They're like application forensic scientist. You've got to sort of, take a mistake, don't try to gloss it over, bring it out in the open, address it cleanly, move on. It's really important to do that. If you have non-traditional recommenders, if you work in a job where maybe you're working for your parents or family-owned company, and you get a recommendation from an accountant or a supplier, this is where you should write about it. If you can't use your boss because you're going to get fired, if he or she knows you're going to school, so use someone that left your firm or a colleague who's a little bit more senior than you, but it's not directly your boss. This is where you write about it. Okay. When you are done writing, when you've addressed an issue, be quiet. Don't feel like you have to write more. Do not feel like you need to fill the space. Address an issue. If they give you 400 words to address it and you read and you've written 230 and it's done, it's done. You don't need to fill the whole gap. Reapplicants, those of you who were denied in the past, in the last couple of years or last year didn't get in, reread your previous application. Do not put it to the side and forget about it. Try to show growth either in your work, new responsibility, new promotions, maybe new leadership outside of work, maybe better test scores, maybe you had a bad GPA, you took some courses. You've got to show growth. You've got to highlight those differences, okay? And be self-aware to address previous deficiencies. You can't say, well, I applied to this school, I interviewed, I got waitlisted, I didn't get in, it's just the luck of the draw. I'll apply next year, I kind of don't really need to be that different, and I'll hopefully get in. You can't be that person. You always have to be better the next time you apply, even if you were close the first time, okay? And if you look at your candidates and you think, what, I'm actually not that different, nothing's really changed, you might rethink about applying immediately, maybe take another year and apply, the year later, or maybe you apply to a different school. If you cannot show yourself to be a better candidate, really think twice about spending your money, spending your recommenders' time, and going through the process again if you're not going to be any better. Okay, so with that, just a couple quick things. We do support people in their applications. Again, it's all on our site. We do have full service packages. We do have hourly. We do have final reviews. We're actually, in the next few weeks, going to be releasing even more package offerings. If you have questions about certain things, we can talk about that and kind of give you a preview and get you guys signed up in those things. Everyone from Beat the GMAT gets a discount. Discount code's here. Realize sort of next steps, get started. Okay, round one deadlines, they are coming up. If there's a school that's released their essay questions, if they haven't, get started. You can still do a lot of things before your applications are released. Okay, we've got a bunch of pretty cool webinars we think coming up that are pretty popular. Sign up, because we actually try to basically not have a huge number of people on there when possible, because we want to get to all the questions, and we try to do it like in an hour and 10 minutes. We're on Facebook. We're actually trying to get more active. We're on Twitter. We're on our blog. And if you want a free consultation and you've not had one, you can go to sketch.me/AvidAdvantage. Again, if you haven't had one. So if you've had one with Eric or with I, you can't do one with another person. But if you haven't had any, or even if it was last year, reach out to us. You can email us at info@avidadvantage.com, or you can hit me at kkankam@avidadvantage.com. And so with that, let's take about 15 or 20 minutes of questions and go from there. Okay, so the first question is, people often go for an MBA. This is kind of, okay, people often go for an MBA today for better job opportunities, not to understand what the essence of an MBA means, which is why universities demand work experience. What is your view on that? Sorry, hold on a second. I need to answer. To open this up a little, it's hard to read. Okay, so the question is, people often go for an MBA nowadays for the better job opportunities, not necessarily to understand what an MBA really means, which is why universities demand work experience. Although necessary, what are your views? Well, my views are that there are schools, and to be honest with you, most schools are adding a component or increasing the component of people coming straight from undergrad. Harvard has this 2+2 program. They've increased it steadily. I think when they started, they had 60+ students. Now they've had 90 to 100+ students in the class, and the class hasn't grown in size. So effectively, the people coming straight from undergrad are taking spots from people that work a lot. I actually think that it's a good idea for people to work. My personal opinion is that for a number of reasons. I think that one, you may not be really clear on what exactly you want to do, even if you can get into a really good school. I think that if you're really young, sometimes it's hard to interact with some of your older classmates. I'll give you a quick anecdote about that. And I also think that it's really good for the discussions, interaction, have people in your class that have done different things. So they lend a certain kind of insight and perspective to certain tasks, certain cases, certain examples that you're reviewing in class, and it's really good to have those people in. I had a very good friend, went to MIT when I was at Harvard. He wanted to go to business school immediately. He basically went after working for a year, and he got into Harvard. And he liked his time there, but he realized, we talked about this, he was going back for his 10th year reunion. He realized that he didn't know, he didn't have really great relations with a lot of people in his class. So his job had gone well, but when he thought about sort of switching jobs and doing something different and tapping into his classmates, he only really knew the super young people in his class. He went at 23 and a half, 24. He wasn't really that close to the 26, 27, 28-year olds. And he didn't have the kind of relation because when he went to school, they didn't necessarily really interact with him in the same way. And he didn't really feel comfortable interacting with them. And so I think that's something to think about. Even if you can get in, is it the right time for you? Okay, next question. In finance and other fields, an MBA is more of a necessary step to progress into the next level, i.e. associate VP, etc. Is that sufficient for the why now question, or what's a more creative way to go about that? That's a good question. Um, if you're one of those people who is in finance right now as an analyst, and you basically want to stay in finance and you want to, eventually hopefully become an MD or run your own company, it is okay to say that. It is okay to say that in the context of your specific job for the why now. I think you need to obviously weight, WEIGHT, weight more heavily your reason for a specific school, right? But yeah, saying that, look, an MBA is kind of a prerequisite for this next level is good. I wouldn't say it just from the perspective of just the requirement. I would say it from the perspective of the development it's going to give you. So saying that, look, I'm an analyst in Goldman. I want to become sort of eventually an MD. I need an MBA to gain the relevant training, networking, contacts, basically perspective, to be a better manager and have a better feel for how deals are done internationally, et cetera, et cetera. And that's actually kind of a requirement of of the next position I want. That's totally fine. You'd wordsmith that a little bit, but it's fine to say that. But again, you're speaking more so about sort of the skills and experiences you're going to get from the MBA. You're speaking also about why you want it from a particular school, as opposed to just saying it's about, I need it in order to get to this next level. Okay. That's fine to say that. Okay, so there's a question about HBS this year. HBS is limited essays this year, and it's an optional essay. How would you advise we attack that? Well, look, I would advise you certainly. I'd advise you certainly write the essay. So I know that there was sort of a statement that there's some people that don't even write any essays. Look, I'd advise you write the essay. I think that this is why it's even more critical at the beginning to have an idea of kind of what you want to express in terms of stories, experiences, and accomplishments, as well as critical leadership components. I think that in the absence of doing that well, I probably would look to use the optional essay. I think a safe way to use it is to sort of speak about, either, why you want a specific MBA, why you want an MBA, how it fits into sort of why you want an MBA and how it fits into your short and long-term goals, which is a question that you used to ask, or to really write about sort of the impact you hope to have on the class. And how you sort of help to make the place, the community, with its fellow HBS students, with its fellow Harvard students, with its fellow people, in sort of the Cambridge community, alumni community, how you think your skill sets, your experiences, and your background will be an asset. But yeah, look, I think you need to use that essay for something important, and I think you need to start from the outset of what do you want to express. To me, that's even just more testament to the fact that you have to have a narrative. You have to have talking points that you want to communicate over the course of your application. Okay, question. Is being over 30 a real disadvantage? And if yes, how do you overcome that? Well, I don't think it's a real disadvantage. I mean, I think there's sort of this echo chamber on these boards about how, being 30 is a problem. It's funny, I'm friends with the guy that did the blog MBA over 30, which I think some of you guys have read. I think when you're 30 plus, I think that you need to articulate, there are a couple of things that come into play. One, are you a good fit for a full-time program, an executive MBA program, or a part-time program? And a lot of schools sometimes have trouble filling part-time programs or sometimes filling even exec MBA programs. So they might try to funnel you to one of those programs. I think you've got to be very clear about why a specific program, specifically if you're over 30 going for a full-time, why that makes sense. I think you also have to be sensitive to the fact that business schools want to see people who are doing well in their career. Um, they want to bet on winning horses. And I think when you're over 30, sometimes there's a concern, maybe understated or not said, there's a concern that maybe you're just sort of using business school to accelerate your, to basically jumpstart your career. So I think you need to be sensitive to that. I think you also need to be very clear about um, being comfortable working with people that are younger than you that are definitely going to shape you. I don't think you can come in and say, look, I'm 30. I think what happens, a lot of people that are, say 32, 33, or anything over 30 say, yeah, I'm going to come in and teach my classmates blank, blank, blank. And they position themselves as potentially sort of acting as if they've got all the answers over their younger classmates, or that they're not going to be totally comfortable, interacting and being totally open to the ideas and perspectives of the younger classmates. So you got to be careful about that. But the positives, the fact that you can say, look, I've got X, Y, and Z years of experience, that's a great thing to have. And so I think you've got to be a little bit more careful being over 30, but I actually think it can be, we work with a lot of people over 30, and I have to look at the numbers, but I know they don't do worse than the people that are in their early to mid 20s, and they might do a little bit better, but you've got to be deliberate about what you write about. Okay. Okay. A question. Um, you mentioned about the quote unquote community impact that needs to be highlighted. How critical is it? What if you don't have anything worthwhile to talk about? Well, I think it's actually pretty important. And again, community impact does not mean volunteering at your local soup kitchen. So community can mean a lot of different things. It's basically anything outside of work. So your community, again, can be your ethnic community, can be your religious community, can be your physical neighborhood. Um, it can basically be the community where, outside of which your job is located. It can be your undergraduate community, right? So you need to write about having an impact in those areas. And that's pretty important because, again, most of the people that are applying to school are qualified, right? They've got good, I mean, you're going to apply, like, you're applying to sort of these top 5, top 7 schools. There are just so many people at the schools. I'll give you an example. So when I applied to Wharton, I was so shocked to see when I got there were literally like 45 people from Harvard College here, right? And I started realizing, there must be so many people that are kind of just so simple. Like, there's so many people who've got good grades, went to good schools, or even if they didn't go to the well-known schools. Like, they did pretty well. It's not enough to have the GMAT, the work experience, and the GPA. The reality is there's just way too many people applying. So you've got to have something else, and that's something else basically by default. The community I'm talking about is kind of everything outside of work. So if you're saying you've got nothing to talk about or write about, you're kind of giving the indication that you haven't really done that much outside of work. Now, you can get away with that a little bit if you're an investment banker working 100 hours a week, but I can even tell you, we've worked with a lot of investment bankers, and most of them have found a way to do something outside of work. So I think it can be an issue if you don't have it. I actually think it's pretty important. Okay. Question. What advice would you give for writing strong essays to those who are coming to B school from a nonprofit background where you don't necessarily have quantitative data to back up your accomplishments at work? Well, I think you can still write really strong essays. Actually, there's a woman on my learning team who worked for competitor to Peace Corps, and we actually have a consultant that worked for Kiva who used us when she was applying to school. Kiva's kind of a Peace, I won't call it Peace Corps Light, they'd be mad, but it's similar to Peace Corps, which most of you know. You still have a lot to write about, even though you come from a nonprofit background. There are many things you could. So one, I think obviously you need to try to do well on your GMAT because that will help alleviate the issue about whether or not you're quantitative and can do the work. I think hopefully you've had a good GPA as well. I think that you've got the experience of basically being able to say, there's certain things you have when you work in a nonprofit. You've got obviously your you're sort of you believe in investing in your community. You probably have had to make do with limited resources. So there's an ability for you to be adaptive. You probably have had to fundraise or be involved in fundraising in some way, shape, or form. And that takes a certain amount of communication, a certain amount of competition to get funds from, entities that are pitched all the time. Um, you probably can speak more so about impact in ways that resonate a little bit more with people. So it's not just doing a deal. It's about, we helped save this many families or educate this many kids or send, or feed this many types of people, et cetera. So you do have a lot you can write it about. And I would challenge you um, and not think that coming from a nonprofit is a disadvantage. I actually think it can be a great advantage because you're not like so many candidates who are coming from the consulting companies or banking companies, or even the marketing companies kind of all look alike and really have to work well to differentiate. You come in already differentiated at the outset. Okay, question. And we'll take two more questions. This question, maybe one or two more after this. Question: are there GMAT scores that are too low that make it not worthwhile applying to top 20 U.S. business schools? Well, look, you always look at these schools and they love putting out there that they have their range is 570 to 790. The reality is there are not that many 570 people. I think that um, if you're looking at the top 20 schools where the mean goes up all the time, I think that if you're below a 650, I think it's really tricky to get. And I'll say 640 and below. I think if you're 680, 650 to 680, I think it's a blemish, but it's not insurmountable. I think 690 to 710, I think is good, and then 710 plus kind of the sweet spot where you want to be today. So I would say probably below a 640, I think it's going to be pretty tricky for you to get into school. Now, you obviously can look at your taking a GRE. Um, there, we've worked with people, some of them are on our site, that have not had those scores and still gotten in, but it's pretty tricky. So when you say it's worthwhile, I mean, obviously, if you don't apply to school, you'll never get in. The question is financially, time-wise, you've got to make that determination whether it makes sense for you to apply to school when you don't have when you're at there's such a gap between the mean GMAT and your GMAT, and you're kind of really on the outside fighting your way in. Does it make sense for you? And that's really a personal question. Okay, last question. Is our brand that we want to highlight similar in all schools? If not, how can you decide which brand to emphasize in essays as well as in other aspects of the application? If you refer to the information, quote, who is the school looking for, or do you emphasize the same characteristics with those of other applicants? Okay, so this is a question about if you're applying to multiple schools, do you come in as the same person? Do you have the same brand? And my response, which I don't know if it's controversial, but my response is yes. My response is that I think a lot of you, and partly it's because of marketing, partly it's because of kind of what goes on in these message boards. I think a lot of you potentially have the impression that certain schools only have certain kinds of people. So Kellogg, if you want to do marketing, you go to Kellogg. If you want to do general management, Harvard's just filled with only general management people. If you want finance, you go to, Wharton's a finance school, right? If you want nonprofit, you have to go to, Yale. And Yale's basically, if you're not doing nonprofit, if you're doing finance at Yale, it's never going to happen. The reality is some of that's marketing. And one of my mentors is a former MD at Barclays who runs his own company. We're on a board together, and he went to Kellogg. And he hates marketing, okay? I mean, and, I've got good friends that I went to Wharton with who do marketing and are kicking butt in marketing. That's all they love, and they hate finance. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. I think you can't be a top 10 school or really top 20 school without being strong across the board. It's kind of like the event, the decathlon. You can't win the decathlon being terrible in pole vaulting. You just can't do it. You have to be good at everything, and maybe some things you're a little bit better at than others. But these schools are not so they're not so monolithic where they're only good at one thing, such that you have to change your brand. Now, you may emphasize certain stories at one school versus another based on a little bit on what you want to do or a little bit on the feel. So you don't want to apply to Chicago and say that you're non-quantitative, right? Um, and if you have like, if you're analytical quantitative, you're just going to be analytical quantitative or potentially a great communicator, you can only get one thing out in one essay and you're applying to Chicago, you will probably pick the analytical quantitative. If that's the last thing you can include. But the reality is, I believe that you need to have a base, you need to have one specific sort of set of stories, one specific perspective, and apply to these top 10 schools and being yourself. You can't be inauthentic. You shouldn't have different brands. Like, your brand is, so the stories, experience, accomplishments are really important to you. Your leadership characteristics, they're your short and long term goals. Like, those things are consistent. You shouldn't be changing that around, or else you're not really writing about who you are. Okay. So with that, let's end it there. Thank you guys for being patient, and women also. And if you have any questions, shoot us a note. And all I ask from you is that you cheer for the Spurs tonight. We need a victory, guys. So those of you who've been on other webinars know I'm an Ohioan. My wife is from Akron. We don't hate LeBron. We just don't want him winning more titles. So not this year anyway. So anyway, good luck, guys. Reach out. We look forward to talking to you, and have a great weekend.